Are the Philippines changing tactics? Aten Ito challenges the Chinese efforts to block the Scarborough Shoal. The Philippines Secretary of National Defense Gilbert Teodoro last month announced the Philippines would change their approach to how his country would confront China in the disputed reefs in the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. This was after the Philippine Coast Guard and a Philippine Fishery Development Authority vessel was patrolling in the Scarborough Shoal when they were confronted by 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships that used water cannons against them. The Chinese use of water cannons against Philippine ships in the EEZ were becoming commonplace. However, this was the first time that the Chinese used this tactic on Philippine government ships, and it initiated the call to change tactics. Secretary Teodoro did not state what the change of tactics would be, but a couple of incidents have occurred since the incident at the Scarborough Shoal that might give a hint of the new strategies. The first indication of the tactic change was at the Escoda Shoal, where the Philippines discovered what appeared as a Chinese attempt to build an artificial island at this location that is only 75 miles from Palawan, which is part of the islands that make up the Philippine nation. The Philippines sent out 3 of their Coast Guard vessels, including their largest, to maintain constant presence in the shoal to ward off the return of the Chinese flotilla that had been operating in the area. The fact that the Philippines sent their largest Coast Guard vessel is telling because often the Chinese Coast Guard vessels, some of which are converted from Navy warships, are typically of greater tonnage compared to the Philippine vessels they encounter. This has allowed the Chinese to successfully use ramming tactics against the smaller Philippine vessels and take advantage of that greater tonnage. The Philippines are also sending out teams to collect evidence of where the crushed coral that was found in the shoal to attempt to build an artificial island had originated. This will most likely be made public to show the world the Chinese activities in the South China Sea and possibly be presented to an international maritime court as a complaint to be ruled upon of the Chinese illegal activities in the Philippine EEZ. A new incident occurred this week in the Scarborough Shoal that was a relatively new approach to challenge the Chinese. A Philippine group called Aten Ito, this means "this is ours" is the meaning of that term, organized a flotilla to sail to the disputed shoal. The shoal was to conduct a 3-day. The goal was to conduct a 3-day mission to provide food and diesel to the Philippine fishermen anchored around the shoal. These fishermen are often threatened and harassed by the Chinese maritime militia and the Chinese Coast Guard, who claim the entire South China Sea as their sovereign territory and treat the Philippine nationals in the shoal as trespassers. At Ito on Wednesday, May 15th, with 200 volunteers and 100 fishermen organized on 5 wooden bancas to set sail to the Scarborough Shoal and were escorted by 100 Philippine fishing vessels. Not all of them made the full trip, though. The flotilla's announced intent was to provide supplies to the Philippine fishermen around the shoal, but the true goal of this publicized event was to challenge the Chinese claims in the Philippine EEZ. Some of the volunteers on board the boats were there to film, video, and catalog the event. A small advance team from the Philippines group succeeded in entering the Scarborough Shoal and was able to deliver supplies that was distributed to 36 Philippine fishing boats with 144 fishermen. The successful delivery of the provisions was twofold in that it was a humanitarian gesture to support the Philippine fishermen that faced daily harassment from the Chinese, but it also was able to breach the Chinese blockade around the shoal. The Chinese had deployed 1 Navy ship, 8 Coast Guard ships, 34 maritime militia ships around the shoal, so it was a serious attempt by China to block access. The group gave credit for their successful mission to their ingenuity and bravery to break through the Chinese blockade. The main part of the flotilla did not attempt to land in the Scarborough Shoal due to the heavy Chinese presence, but were able to document the Chinese presence and reaction. The Philippine government was not involved in the operation, but the Philippine Coast Guard did escort the flotilla to monitor the Chinese activities along with a Coast Guard aircraft, with the official purpose of protecting Philippine civilians from Chinese reactions. The Chinese threatened to the main flotilla, so it chose not to challenge the Chinese blocking the shoal. The Chinese government did react to the incursion by authorizing its Coast Guard to arrest any, quote, foreigners, end quote, trespassing in its claimed territorial waters. But this was issued after the Philippine group had successfully breached the Chinese line. No attempted arrests were made after the incident, and more of a threat to discourage future returns of Philippine civilians. The large presence of Chinese ships in the region was due to the announced mission of Ito to sail to the Scarborough Shoal and was not claimed to be a blockade. The interpretation and use of blockade is being loosely used. The blockage of the Scarborough Shoal is more of a technicality, as any attempt to enter the shoal is blocked by the Chinese and in effect is really a blockade. China also maintains a constant presence in the region to harass the Philippine ships with the intent to make them leave and deny them access to the fishery in and around the shoal. Blockade is being used and not used for a dual purpose. The Philippines call it a blockade because the number of ships used to block its ability to get into the shoal, and the Chinese avoid the term altogether. A blockade is an act of war according to the 1856 Paris Declaration respecting maritime law and Articles 1 through 22 of the 1909 London Declaration concerning the laws of naval war. But no power in the region is willing to challenge China to go to war over an uninhabited shoal in the EEZ, even if they call it a blockade and acts as a de facto blockade. This would be approached differently if the blocking territory waters were in the territorial waters and not the extended EEZ. The Chinese are also using the maritime militia to do most of the blocking and harassing, and the Chinese claim they are civilians and not military and outside government control. This is another technicality by the Chinese, since the militia takes their direction from various levels of the Chinese Communist Party. The actions at Ito are relatively new tactics by the Philippines and had been used one time before, successfully, in late 2023. What the Ito is performing is the same function as the Chinese maritime militia performs, and that is maritime gray tactics. Gray zone tactics are tactics between war and peace and are used to create a condition favorable to one side. The use of these tactics by China is to deploy a non-military force to block freedom of navigation, intimidate and coerce, quote, the foreign elements, end quote, elements in the South China Sea. The intent is to ward off any smaller power from reacting to the presence of the groups conducting the tactics, to avoid an escalation, or on the Chinese side to try to encourage an escalation so the bigger power, China, can justify using military force to, quote, protect, end quote, its citizens. Ito is a Philippine response to the gray zone tactics of China with a gray zone tactic of its own. Ito put itself in harm's way, knowing that any overreaction by the Chinese, that would caused the death of a Philippine citizen would be a serious escalation. In mid-April, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. stated that any death of a Philippine citizen would trigger the defense pact with the Philippines. The statement was in the context of the death of a potential death of a Philippine serviceman, but was stated after the Chinese Coast Guard used water cannons against a civilian ship that was attempting to resupply the Second Thomas Shoal, that resulted in the injury of 3 Philippine sailors aboard that civilian ship. The open question is, the statement was only servicemen or Philippine citizens covered by that declaration from the president. The Philippine Coast Guard was observing Ito from the sea and the air with the instated goal to protect its citizens. Is this intent a challenge to China to force it to back down, to avoid a situation that would kill or potentially kill a Philippine citizen and risk an escalation that would not only be the Philippines, but also the U.S. and possibly Japan? It is unclear if the use of Ito to break the China attempts to block the access to disputed waters is a tactic change that Secretary Teodoro was referring, or even if it will be used again. It is a challenge by the Philippines not to give up the rights to the disputed shoals in the West Philippine Seas. As a side note, the name West Philippine Seas is the name of the area that is in the South China Sea, but that is part of the Philippine EEZ. So the Philippines are not simply giving up their claims by abandoning the region in the West Philippine Sea to China. It is a real challenge to China because it is if China acts aggressively against unarmed Philippine citizens in light boats that most likely would not be able to stand up to the common use of water cannon assaults, it could kill or seriously injure a Philippine national. If that happens, it risks triggering a showdown with the U.S. It would be in a region that China would not want to fight a naval war, so the escalation cycle continues to press the Chinese on their illegal claims.